Hello, everybody. My name is Selvin Ortiz, and joining us is Ben Parizek. Today there's actually a lot of people in the room, including Brad and Brandon Kelly from Pixel and Tonic and the creators of Craft CMS. And Brandon's actually going to be taking us through a tour of the ElementType API, which a lot of us are very anxious to learn more about. So for everybody else in the room, if we can kind of hold our questions till the end or when it is appropriate, that'll be great. So with that said, Brandon, I'm handing it to you.
Thanks, Selvin. And just slight correction, I'm fine with questions. If you have any, throw them out there.
Okay. Okay, got it.
I don't know. I have no idea if I'm going to be losing you guys or anything like that. So let's start at a very high level. What is an element in Craft? And maybe the best way to start this would be to ask you guys what element types are you aware of in Craft without looking at the source code?
Sections.
No.
Entries.
Entries, tags.
One.
Assets.
Entries, tags, assets.
Tags, categories, right?
Yeah, pretty much everything that's in the ElementType enum, pretty much. I think Brad.
Okay,
or
yeah,
Brad
how
can...
looking the code, Selvin?
I didn't. I have it memorized, man. Come on.
Okay.
I didn't. I swear.
So,
users as well, I think.
Yeah, so we've got entries, globals, categories, tags, users, assets, and even matrix blocks. Off the top of my head, those are the seven built-in element types. So the theme there is these are all things that that Craft is built to manage. These are the actual pieces of content that you're managing in Craft. Most of them, all of them have custom fields associated with them, and you've probably noticed the custom field implementation is identical throughout all of them for the most part. They are, for the most part, all relatable to each other, so that's a feature that element types handle. And they can, all of them except for users can be localized, so that's another feature of element types. And there's probably others that I'm forgetting, but I was thinking, I guess if you think of Craft as Craft is a content management system, and if you were to make the analogy to a file management system or a file system, if Craft is the file system, the elements are the files, and the element types are the file extensions. So every element in the system that can be edited has a type, which is the element type, and that extension or element type basically defines all of the file-specific attributes about this thing. So there's certain things that all elements share, and there's certain things that make them special. The element type is what determines what's so special about this particular element versus another. So how many of you guys have done anything with field types, with Craft or Expression Engine?
I've done some stuff.
Yeah, I've done a bit with field type. The map plugin's basically a field type.
Okay. So, I guess that you could kind of look at it similarly to that as well, in that Craft has a bunch of fields, and a field on its own doesn't really tell you much. You need to know what type of field it is. You need to write a field type class, and that field type class is going to define everything that's special about that field, from what types of settings it has, what kind of data it can hold, what the input looks like, what happens when the field gets saved, how the field, outputs data on the front end. Everything that's specific to the field, besides just what its name and handle are things that are provided by the field type class. And so the same kind of thing happens with element types. Same thing happens with widgets. Same thing happens with a number of other components in the system.
So basically, in the way that a field type defines the behavior of that field, an element type defines the behavior of that element.
Right. Correct. So here's where it's a little different as far as element types are concerned compared to field types normally. Normally, you can write a field type, and that can stand on its own, and it's basically just a class that defines what's going on with this field. And usually, like, there's not a whole lot more behind the scenes with that. There's certain exceptions. For example, matrix field has like its whole matrix service behind it, and there's like a whole application going on there behind that certain field type. But for the most part, checkboxes, drop downs, stuff like that, it's all pretty much all the code is contained in that field type, and most of the time that's going to be the case with you guys too. And once you write that one single class, you can call it a day. Now with element types, the norm is the opposite. The norm with element types is that there is an entire application that you have to write that handles all the dirty work for the element type, and the element type is just kind of this thin veneer on top of all that, and it's taking all of your application logic and it's making it accessible to the rest of the system. So I don't know if that makes 100% sense, but if you take a look, elements that I need, entries, assets, users, every single one of those has a whole service behind the scenes. It has its own controllers. It has its own records, its own models. It's got all the makings of a normal application that's existing and manifesting itself as a plugin or whatever within Craft. And really, the element type specific stuff are really small code weight wise compared to the rest of the functionality that goes into those things, such as an entry. So, with that said, I don't know how much you guys have been doing with actual like application development with Craft, meaning writing plugins that have controllers and have services and have maybe template variables and have all these different things. But that is the first step to making an element type, is dealing with that stuff. So and then once you've got that in place, element types are basically just a matter of kind of changing a couple things and making it telling the rest of the system how to interact with these elements. So with that said, let me just show you. As I mentioned earlier, I've been over the last couple hours been throwing together a little events plugin. It's extremely lightweight. It's not going to solve anyone's actual problems, but it's a simple enough concept that I figured it would be a good way to get the concepts across here without distracting you with all this event-specific business logic that I didn't want to write. So with that said, let me figure out how to screen share. And is there a way? Oh, desktop right there, first one. Okay, this is probably going to get kind of crazy here for you guys for a second. Can everyone see my screen?
Yep, I can see it.
Pull over the chat window so I can at least see that. No, whatever. Okay, well, just let me know. I'm going to keep the actual Hangouts window hidden, just so there's no crazy inception thing going on with the video. So what I did was I wrote this events plugin. You can see plugins. Here it is, and there's no settings or anything. It's just an enable or disable kind of thing. And once you have it in, it has this new tab to the top called Events, and you can see that it looks pretty similar to some of the other tabs in Craft, similar to the entries page, for example, with the exception that it does have these tabs here, and that's because in Craft to add additional settings yet, and I suppose down the road when we add that would be a more appropriate place to manage this calendar side. But for now, we've just got a couple tabs here, so you can click on Calendars, and once again, this is a very, very standard UI for Craft. We've got a little admin table component here, and you can click on my calendar, or you can create a new one. And when you go into this, you can see there's basically a name, a handle, and then there's this field layout designer. And so this, all the code managing calendars has almost nothing to do with element types. This is just a standard CRUD calendar application, and it's got it could have split this up into a couple of services, but for now there's just an events controller, and there's an event service, and both of them kind of start off with some calendar-facing functions. So we've got in event service, we've got get all calendar IDs, we've got get all calendars, get total calendars, get calendar by. Yeah. Is that better? Sorry about that. We've got get calendar by ID, get calendar by handle, and save calendar, and then finally delete calendar by ID. So these are all pretty standard CRUD functions. All the code was just copy and pasted from different areas in Craft. I think I used tag groups and tags as a starting point here. So there's nothing really special going on. It's basically find and replace. But I'll show you real quick, because the one thing that is kind of related to elements here is that field layout designer. So I'll show you the template that went into this. So there's the templates, calendars, and then we've got edit.html, and you can see this is pretty standard form for outputting UI stuff in Craft. There's this one piece right here. It's an include, and it says include the includes/field layout designer template with a field layout object that's assigned to calendar.getFieldLayout, and it's saying customizable tabs is false, which I think I've actually changed, so we'll go ahead and take that out. That was, I don't know if you've noticed, you probably have, that like entries, for example, and sections in Craft have customizable tabs and everything else doesn't. It's pretty much just a matter of whether you include this line or not. There's nothing special about entries. So we'll go ahead and remove that. And just by including this, calendar.getFieldLayout, well, calendar is a events calendar model, and you can see it's got this field layout behavior assigned to it, telling the model to include a behavior, which is basically, behaviors in Yi are like Yi's way of adding sort of multiple inheritance to PHP. This is before traits existed, but I guess even after E2, where they're fully supporting traits and everything, I think they're still keeping behaviors around because they do add some other things as well. So we're basically saying, this has a field layout behavior, and if you take a look at that class, you can see that its constructor requires an element type to be passed in, an element type class name, and then it kind of takes care of the rest there. So go back over here. So by adding this field layout behavior, we received we inherited the get field layout function that we're calling right here. So that's basically it as far as assigning field layouts to things. Is you need to have a model that includes the field layout behavior, and then you also need a place to store the field layout ID. And you can see that if we go to events, calendar, record, we've got this field layout ID right here. we're telling it that there's a relation between field layout and the field layout record. And on delete, just set that to null. So again, I'm not going to go too in depth on all this stuff because you really, it's all pretty boilerplate, and not a lot of it has to do with element type specifically. It's just kind of like a standard way of like defining a record in Craft, and all you really need to know is, okay, well, you need to have this field layout ID inside your table wherever you want to actually start storing field layouts. So in this thing, we've decided that each individual calendar is going to get its own set of fields, and so because of that, the calendars table is the one that gets the field layout ID column. So if we take a look at our database, you see there's there's two tables here: Craft Events and Craft Events Calendars. And Craft Events Calendars has ID, name, handle, field layout ID. And there's a foreign key between field layout ID and the field layouts.id column. So, that said, we've got our conferences calendar, and conferences calendar has one field. It's called body. It's got one tab called content. And we saved that, and here it is in our little admin table. So, is everyone with me so far? Before I go on.
Yeah.
Yeah, for the most part. Let me ask a question, and I hope it doesn't make me sound too dense here. So, I guess I'm still trying to get a gauge of like where the line would be drawn as far as like what would be a good subject for an element type versus just, you know, a field type or whatever. So in this case, you can correct me if I'm wrong. Both you have events and calendars, and those are both element types, or the calendar is an element type. Or what exactly is the element type itself here?
We haven't gotten to that yet, but
okay.
events are the actual elements here. My point here is that calendars are just a standard thing that that you would add the CRUD stuff for in the same way you would do any other application within Craft. So far, we haven't. The most that we've talked about here that have to do with elements is that conferences have a field layout, and field layouts are something that elements are going to use to figure out which fields they need to show. But calendars aren't an actual element type.
So the calendar isn't an element type, but the events are about to be an element type.
Right. And I guess if I had to give you a rule of thumb on what, I mean, because technically we could have made calendars an element type. There's nothing stopping us from doing that. I would say that the rule of thumb on whether you should make something an element type or not is whether it's something that you expect site authors to be interacting with on a regular basis, or site users in general to be interacting with on a regular basis, as opposed to more of an admin type task that you would set up once and then hand the site off to the client and be done with. So I think, and with events, like that's kind of a gray area. Maybe someone wants to be able to create calendars as often as they want. In which case, if they're doing that, they also might want to start editing content on those calendars, like creating calendar descriptions or who knows what else. And at that point, like maybe we are talking about turning calendars into an element type. The good news is that with Craft, it's extremely easy to take a non-element type and turn it into an element type. There's a function in MigrationHelper, and now that I'm saying this, I remember that there's actually a bug. We need to update it for 2.0, so we'll get that done really soon. But there's a function in MigrationHelper in Craft called makeElemental. And this function, the goal of it is basically to take any table in the system that's currently being used to manage records of whatever, and turn it into what we're calling an element type extension table. And an element type extension table is just like any other table in the system, but the one special thing about it is, and this is just a convention, but the one special thing about it is that it generally has an ID column that is a foreign key to the elements table's ID column. And the reason for that is that if something's an element type, it's always going to need a row in the elements table. And theoretically, if you have another table that needs to store additional data, it would always be a one-to-one map there between a row in your table versus a row in the elements table. So what we've done, if you take a look at the entries table, you'll see that the ID column is going to be a foreign key to the elements table.
Brandon, can I jump in with a quick question as well?
Yeah, sure.
So besides what you just said of kind of a best practice for figuring out if something should be an element type, would it be correct to say that if you want to allow users to create fields and then populate that with content, that's another use case for an element type, because then you have access to the Craft content table and so on?
I'm not sure I'm following the question.
So if I have a plugin and I want people to be able to enter the content using fields, fields that exist in Craft, using that field layout, is that a use case for an element type, or can that be done without an element type?
If you want, I'm sorry, are you saying you want them to be able to modify the field layout itself, or just the content within the fields you've created?
Modify the field layout.
Okay, well, I mean, I guess that's up to you. Every single field layout in Craft itself, the actual field layout is only modifiable by admins, because they're all tucked away in that settings section, and that settings section is exclusive to admins. But there's no reason why you couldn't allow anyone access to one of those field layout editors.
Maybe I wasn't so clear. It's not so much about accessing the field layout editor as much as it is allowing
them to edit the content within the actual fields.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So custom fields in Craft are a element type exclusive concept.
Okay.
So if you want to connect your thing, whatever it is, with custom fields, if you want custom fields to be able to be associated with your whatever your app is managing, you would need to do that as an element type. In that case, there's no rule of thumb. It's just that's your only option.
Right.
So,
okay. Otherwise, you're just creating your own custom fields in your plugin.
Yeah, you'd have to create your whole custom field implementation, and so that's, I guess an important point to get across. I've been saying, you're basically writing a whole application yourself, and then element types are a thin veneer on top of that. Mm-hmm. If you have ever written your own custom field implementation for anything, whether it's in Craft or any other application, all of that work, you might have a sense for how much goes into that, especially if you wanted to make it generic and work with field types and all that kind of stuff. All that work is saved by going with the ElementType API.
Right. I think that's a good.
It does save you a lot of work to do things as an element type if you want the features that they provide. But the difference, I guess, or the reason we don't want to just say it's so easy is because there is a lot of application development you have to do on your own before you get to the actual element type part. So it probably saves you half the work, but that half the work, but you still have to do the other half. So it's just a different kind of beast than something like a field type or a widget, which is just write one class and you're done. So anyways, if you take a look, Oh, go
I have
ahead.
one more clarification here, and just let me know if you're going to get to it in the future. But when you showed us the field layouts, we were doing that to the calendar, which wasn't an element type. And you also referred to field layouts the whole time, not fields. So when you say field layouts, are you assuming, like, is that equivalence of just saying we're applying all fields? And how does the field layout relate to the calendar? It seems that it relates to the events of the calendar, but you're setting it up with the calendar.
Yeah. So let me think of how to communicate this. Field layouts are their own concept that are independent from element types or calendars or whatever. There's a thing in Craft called a field layout. The field service manages them, but there's no point in having a field layout without assigning it to something. And there's no point in assigning it to something unless it's assigned there so that an element can have access to it at some point, so that the element knows which fields it has. The problem is, the reason that it's not specifically an element type thing is that in some cases you might want to have a field layout per element, and there's other cases where you might want to have them abstracted away a little bit, and there's other cases where you might only want to have one field layout for the entire element type. So as an example, globals. Globals are an element type in Craft, and every single global has its own field layout. So every element that is of type global gets its own field layout. So in the global case, if you were to take like the globals table, global sets, sorry, you'll see that that the same table that gets a row for each global element also has this field layout ID. So each global has its own field layout ID that it has to pull in to know which fields are assigned to the global. In every other case, it's not quite that simple. In most cases, like sections or sections/entries or categories/category groups or tags/tag groups. In most cases, there's the actual element type, which is the category, the tag, the entry, and then there's its container, and its container is what defines the field layout. So the section or the category group or the tag group. Another way to go about it would be take a look at users, where there are user groups in Craft, but you'll aren't assigned to each user group. They are assigned to users as a whole. There's only one single field layout to govern all users in the system. And the reason we decided to do that was because a single user can belong to more than one group. Groups are not exclusive. So if a single user belongs to two separate groups, then we'd have a very big problem trying to figure out how to merge field layouts together on the edit form. So in the user's case, we just decided, okay, all users share one single field layout, and so that's a field layout that doesn't actually get assigned to anything in particular. There is no foreign key pointing to your user's field layout in any of the tables. If you were to take a look at your field layouts table and take a look at the content, okay, on this side I don't actually have a field layout for users, but if you did, you would notice that there'd be a row in here where the type column equals user, and you could look in every other table you want, and you would never find a foreign key back to that particular row, because there's only one user layout for the whole thing. That's the same way that assets worked up until 2.0. And in 2.0, we just had to kind of write a migration that duplicated that one single asset field layout for each group, or for each asset source. Am I making any sense at all? As far as like why?
Yes. Yeah.
As far as how that works.
That's helping out. I think.
So we'll get to how an element itself identifies which field layout it has in a little bit. That's
sounds good. Satisfied for now on my end.
Okay. So anyways, going back to this site, so we've got this concept of calendars, and we've created a calendar called conferences. And now that we've done that, this conference is considered. We're going to call conferences an element type source, and by considering it a source, that means that in the left tab here in events, we've got a sidebar, and sidebars list the element type sources, and you can see that there's a conference source here. There's all events, and then there's conferences. And theoretically, if we had events, this would be a way to filter the events to just those that are in the conferences calendar. So now we're starting to get into to the actual elements. So and the element type API. So I'll go ahead and show you if I create a new event. I had a little. This button actually is smart enough to know that if there's more than one, it'll do a drop down in the same way that entries do. Since now there's only one calendar, clicking new event just knows, okay, put it in the conferences calendar. So let's say I do peers and start date of, I should know this, the 24th?
It's the 23rd.
I'm going to say the 24th.
Lindsay.
The 22nd.
No way.
No, you're right. 23rd. 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 I'm flying in on the 22nd. Yeah.
All right. So let's say it's that, and then starting at 8 a.m. and it's going until the 25th, and it's going to go until it's going to be late night. And then we have this body field that we had dragged into our field layout for the calendar. So do that. And then in the same way that entries do, I've decided to give this thing save and continue editing, save and add another, or just save. We'll just save for now. And I haven't actually gotten those buttons reacting how they should, but here we go. We've got our event now. And give me a second. Something that hasn't actually been tested. Project. Boom. Okay. So we can't actually edit this yet. We can't go back to it yet. Just we haven't hooked that up yet. Didn't get to that. But you can see that the system works. We've got our new event. We've got the start date and the end date that we determined. And right now they're just outputting the default things you get when you type event.startDate and event.endDate. We can customize that if we want, but we're going to keep it like that for now. So now let's go into how all this is working. So that's why we're here. So this class right here, and let me just close the others. This class right here, this events_event_element_type class, which extends base element type, this is, I guess, the single key of the whole system. This is when Craft's checking to see if there's such a thing as an events_event_element_type. This is the class it's going to be looking for, and if it doesn't exist, then it's just not going to know what to do with an element type, when it's passed in events_event. So type class would be, or your widget class would be, base element type extends another class called base component type, and that's the same base class that field types, widgets, and everything else shares. Anytime that you've got a plugin that provides different components to the system, they all ultimately come out of this base component type class. And something that's very common between all those is a getName function. So that's kind of your opportunity to tell the system who you are. So in this case, we're saying this thing is called events, and then from there, basically, element type classes are just a ton of functions that the behavior for elements of that type. So in this case, we're saying that yes, events have content. So has content returns true, and that is being used by the element service. If you take a look through the element service for has content, you'll see where it's being used. It's basically what determines whether the content table gets joined in when you're searching for event elements. It's what determines whether the content service should be invoked when you're saving events. Whether Craft should go through the trouble of looking for custom fields, and if so, saving those values and all that kind of stuff. So basically, it's very, it's possible to have an element type that does content that just is kind of stuck with the attributes that you've decided to give them, and that's it. No custom fields whatsoever. So if that's the case, you don't add this function. One example of that would be Joel Bradbury came out with charge, and he did it at a time when before 2.0 was out, and I basically told him, do not touch content right now if you want to release this publicly, because that's the one area that was about to be completely refactored. So he's got his charge element type, and each transaction is saved as an element, and he's using the element type API so that he can have things like pagination, and get basically that index page for free in the CP. But he's not using it in a context where he needs content. There's no, since those charges are added dynamically from the front end, there's not a whole lot of need for custom fields there. It's not like, it's not like people that are submitting charges are going to want to start filling out a bunch of fields on top of the credit card info and stuff like that. So, for now, his just doesn't have this function. And let me take a break real quick and just clarify what the word content means, because it can be a little ambiguous. As far as Craft is concerned, content means the data that would be entered into custom fields. So events have a calendar ID, a start date, and an end date, and those would be the properties or the attributes of those elements. And then anything that you might want to save on top of that, such as that body field that was a custom field, any of that stuff would be considered content in Craft. So that's just the word we chose. Content means the data, means custom fields, means data that would be saved by custom fields, all that kind of stuff. So that's what this means. This means next up, titles. So titles are something that get saved centrally in the content table. There's a dedicated column for them called title. And so basically, considering that a lot of things have titles in the system, we just decided to make a special case there where if you're dealing with an element type where each element has titles, go ahead and just say has titles equals true, and then you get the column to store those titles for free. You get the localization of those titles for free, all that kind of stuff, or the translation of those titles for free, and all that stuff. So that's what has titles does. getSources. This is the function that defines the source list for your index page. So right here, anything that's going to show up in the left sidebar here is defined by this getSources function. And there's one other context where this function will get called, and that's within element selector modals. So, for example, if you created an events field where you want your events to be relatable to other things in the system, and then that comes with a little add event button, kind of like there's an add an entry button on entries fields. The modal that would show up there would be taking this getSources function into account to define its sidebar. And that is actually something that you get basically for free. If I were to just go into JavaScript and do craft, let's see, craft.create element selector modal, and I were to say that I want to pull up event_event as the element type, just like that, without doing a single bit of work. I haven't even tested this yet until right now. This modal just showed up, and it's already showing, the same source list, and it's showing the same elements here. So that's an example of ElementType API saving you time right there. And you can do that with any of the element types. You could do. This is something you can take advantage of without creating an element type. You can, if you ever have a need to relate to other elements or whatever outside of a traditional entries field, you want to create your own modal. You can just call this create element selector modal, and that'll give you a little modal window for elements of that type. So anyways, so that's getSources. So in getSources, we're saying that there's going to be this one source with an asterisk that's labeled all events, and it doesn't have any specific criteria along with it. It's just whatever, any events that we can find go with that. And then we're looping through craft.events.getAllCalendars as calendar, and for each one of those, we're adding a new source with the key calendar : and then calendar.id, and then we're appending that to the sources array. We're giving the label of it the calendar name, and we're giving it a criteria saying that if they click on this, that I want to filter the events to the ones that have calendar ID equals this calendar.id. So that is how. So if you kind of think about it you basically can put whatever you want in this criteria array. It's very agnostic. It's not like Craft doesn't care about the relationship between events and calendars. It's up to your element type to define that relationship. If we want to create another source. Call it peers. We could do that. Reload. Now we've got a new source called peers, and this is basically going to return any elements that, with a search value basically predefined as searching for events where the title is peers or includes peers. So this right here, this criteria syntax is the exact same thing you've seen with craft.entries or whatever else, and we'll get to that in a little bit. But basically, any criteria attributes that all elements share, as well as any criteria attributes that your element type decides to add support for as well, are fair game here. So that's what sources are for element types. It's just a little UI thing. Does that make sense so far?
Yeah.
The
Very
chat
nice.
room is ecstatic, Brandon. You don't see it. But.
No.
Yeah.
I don't. Okay.
Stuff's a little bit mind-blowing, but in an amazing way.
What?
It's pretty awesome.
Am I losing you? I'm afraid I'm losing
No,
you.
no, you're not losing us at all. We're just blown away by how awesome this is.
Okay. All right. So then there's defineTableAttributes. So this, you saw me editing this a minute ago. This is basically if you're viewing your elements in table view, which every element type gets by default, you get to choose which columns are going to be there. And you get to choose. Basically, there's two things here: title, and this maps to an order by column. So basically, like this needs to, whatever you put in the left side, your element type needs to support being able to sort by that attribute. So title, if I click on title, now it's not sorting by title because there's PHP error somewhere, but you get the idea. Start date, whatever. That's the idea. Is if you click on title, then it's going to try and sort by this, but whatever you clicked on. And you get attributes here, and that defines what you can see here. So many people have asked for the ability to show custom fields here. It's not possible in the UI yet, but just to give you a sense for how powerful this stuff can be, we haven't, when we decide to add support for it, which is hopefully very soon, it's already basically set up for it. And I haven't even tested this before in my life, but I'm just assuming it's going to work. Just like that. Basically, when we're outputting this peers event, because there's a custom field called body, it got to outputting the value in this column, and it just did event.body, and sure enough, that gave us exactly what we expected back. So, as you can see, Craft is already, that data is already there in the same way it's there anytime you output that event anywhere in your templates, whatever. The data is already there, and basically, like adding support for custom fields here is just a matter of us getting around to the UI for it.
Would that just be a template in the templates folder that because their body, it could be a WYSIWYG field which returns HTML. So some of us, I think, have complex field types with multiple fields. So one.
Yeah. So there is a field type challenge to that. Field types would need to have a way to return a simplified version of their data for use in the table. So that's like half the problem. So it's coming up with like a standard way for field types to return like a string-based table representation of their content. So there's that. This worked in this case because it was a simple rich text field, and there's not, it's just text, and it probably would have been awkward if that HTML was invalid or anything like that. So
will you be supporting images or maps or whatever other crazy things people might want to return?
It would be up to the field type to return whatever it wants. So yeah, I mean, like there's no reason an assets field couldn't return just like a list of thumbnails or something like that, which is probably exactly
Currently, if you wanted to use some sort of custom field type, as long as we can return the equivalent of a toString, we should be able to display it there, even if it's a complex.
Yeah, okay, so let me make it clear. What I just showed you guys, I do not recommend you guys making any assumptions about what the custom fields are going to be called. Like I'm just
right.
showing you that data was available, and down the road, like this is how it works. But I don't. But anything that your element type actually puts here should be things. Making a big assumption on my code's part that there's going to be a custom field called body, which in most cases might be true, but definitely not an assumption I would want to make and deal with that support for. So basically, when we get around to adding custom field support, it's going to be we're basically going to be appending. If the user decides, oh, I want to show the body here too, that's going to be on us to provide the UI where they could select the body field, and it's going to be on us to basically append that body to this array that you're returning. So your element type is not going to have to worry about that. In fact, even the attributes here, when we get around to that, the other thing we're also going to get around to doing is, in general, just making, giving you a big list of checkboxes on which columns you want to show and which columns you don't want to show. And at that point, you're actually going to be encouraged to basically just throw out any possible properties you want in this defineTableAttribute without worrying at all about whether there's space for it. Because this defineTableAttributes function is going to become rather than just a place that defines all of the table attributes that show up, it'll be about defining all the possible attributes that could show up. And then we're going to basically like use that and filter it through a list of the table attributes that the user actually has requested to show up, and just show those ones, as well as just show the custom fields that they've also checked. So does that make sense?
Got it. Yeah, perfect. Perfect sense.
Okay. And then I should say I'm not using it here because I didn't have a need for it, although I guess I could. There's another function, getTableAttributeHtml. Let me just go ahead and copy this over. So this is your chance to customize the output of any of these attributes. So let's say that we're outputting either a start date or an end date. We might want to customize that. We might not like this out year-month-day. Might prefer to run it through the locale date function, which actually takes the user's locale into account and outputs it in a localized format. And if I reload this now, you'll see that it's actually in this nice, U.S. English date format. So this function, getTableAttributeHtml, is your element type's chance to customize the value here.